to ensure that YouTube continues to show you tales like this one. Before we get started, please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment indicating your location and the time you're watching. Look, I know how crazy sounds when I tell people about it, but I promise on everything I own that this really happened to me. My name is Emily, and I was 21 years old at the time, just ending my junior year at the university. I was balancing studies and working part-time at a local coffee shop, so money was tight. Despite the fact that I had to survive on ramen and whatever was on sale at Walmart, I enjoyed the independence that came with living in a tiny studio apartment approximately 15 minutes from university. The entire experience altered my perspective on parking lots at night, and I still get this strange sensation in my chest when my roommate used to say that I was too trusting and willing to help strangers. But after what occurred that Tuesday night in October, I realized that there is a difference between being kind and being naive that night. I often think about what would have happened if I hadn't followed my gut that night. I had just finished a rigorous 3-hour study session for my psychology midterm, and my brain felt like mush. My fridge was essentially empty save for some expired milk and a half-eaten sandwich that seemed dubious, so I picked up my keys and left for Walmart 10 minutes later. When I arrived, it was about 8:30 p.m. from my house, and the parking lot was not filled, but somewhat active. I recall parking near the rear because I didn't want to deal with the crowds near the entrance, and I reasoned that after spending the entire day bent over textbooks, a walk would be beneficial. The store was lively and full of the typical mix of college students, families, and night shift workers grabbing necessities. I walked the aisles with my earbuds in, listening to an indie playlist, and picked up necessities like bread. The shopping trip was quite normal and uneventful. I spent maybe 45 minutes inside, comparing prices because every dollar counted on my budget, and even treated myself to a small bag of those chocolates. I also bought peanut butter, frozen dinners, and a few other necessities that would last me the entire week. I had been craving chip cookies all week, and the cashier, an older woman named Dolores, who always worked the night shift, and I struck up a conversation about the store's upcoming Halloween decorations. She also mentioned how busy they'd been lately with college students going about their weekly runs, and I laughed because I was the automatic door slid open with that recognizable whoosh sound, and I stepped out into the cool October air right away after paying, grabbing my 3 plastic bags and heading toward the exit while checking my phone for a text from my study group about meeting up tomorrow. I was walking across the parking lot when I noticed how much quieter and darker it had gotten. I took a moment to appreciate how serene everything felt. The temperature had dropped just enough to be comfortable, and there was a pleasant breeze that made me happy. I had put on my favorite oversized sweatshirt. I was about 30 feet away from my car, which was parked in the 3rd row back under one of those tall light poles that create long shadows between the cars, when I heard a voice shout out from somewhere behind me and to my left, "Excuse me," but I didn't hear the voice. I turned around and saw a man in a dark hoodie standing next to a black SUV with the back hatch open. He was probably in his 30s, average height, and stared at me with his hands in his pockets. "I'm sorry to bother you, but could you please help me load this box?" He pointed to the open back of his SUV, and I noticed what appeared to be a sizable cardboard box on the ground beside the car. Normally, I'm the kind of person who tries to assist when someone asks, but something about this whole situation made me pause. Perhaps it was I moved my shopping bags to one arm and called back, "Sorry, I'm really in a hurry tonight." Because of the way he was standing so far away from his car, the box looked completely manageable for one person, or simply the feeling of being accosted by a stranger in a dark parking lot. I continued walking toward my car without letting up, but I could feel him observing me. When I turned to look behind me, he was still standing there, not approaching his box or acting in any way that would indicate he truly needed assistance. The entire exchange appeared staged in some way. Like before, I picked up a little speed and began searching my handbag for my car keys with my free hand. He had practiced that precise phrase. I was now acutely aware of how remote this corner of the parking lot was in comparison to the bustling area near the store entrance. I had just arrived at my car. I was struggling with my key fob's unlock button when I heard footsteps coming from behind me. Before I could turn around fully, a voice next to my ear said, "Come on, it'll just take a second." However, my pulse began to race because this man's voice was so different from the hooded guy's. It was smoother, younger, and much too close to me. I turned around and saw a second man, who was probably in his mid-20s, wearing a black jacket and the baseball cap pulled down, placed himself between me and my car's driver's side door, and his presence instantly raised alarms in my mind. The hoodie guy was now approaching us from the other side of the parking lot, no longer acting as though he was having trouble with his box, and I became increasingly alarmed as I realized that I was going to be sandwiched between two men who had obviously been working together from the beginning. I said, "I'm in a hurry," louder this time in an attempt to sound firm. As my thoughts raced through my options, the baseball cap guy moved closer and reached out as if to touch my arm, saying something about how much they needed the help, and it would after only a minute. Instinct took over and I sprang away from him, holding my shopping bags to my chest as if they were a shield. I could see the hoodie guy approaching, perhaps 20 feet distant, and the way they were both moving felt when he reached for my arm again, this time with more force. I knew without a doubt that this was about every self-defense class, coordinated as if they'd done this before. The baseball cap guy's entire demeanor had changed from fake friendliness to something much more aggressive. The most crucial rule: make noise, create a scene, and don't let them take you anywhere came to mind as the next few seconds seemed to go by slowly and incredibly fast. Suddenly, the baseball cap guy released my sweatshirt, and both men began to hurry toward their SUV, which I now, as soon as I saw that it was parked strategically near where I had ended up walking, I opened my car door and threw myself inside, pressing the lock button and starting the engine through my windshield with trembling fingers. I watched them hop into the black SUV hoodie, and the guy in the driver's seat baseball. The SUV's engine roared to life, and for a terrifying moment, I could see more people leaving the store, including what appeared to be a security guard wearing a bright yellow vest, while the cap guy in the passenger side was having what appeared to be an intense, hurried conversation. My car's horn was still blaring from the panic button. My heart pounded against my ribs as I sat there in my locked car, watching their tail lights fade into the main road. I called 911 right there in the parking lot, thinking they were going to smash my car or will try to block me in, but instead they pulled out of the spot and sped toward the exit. The dispatcher was quite professional and calm, asking me precise questions about the men's appearance, their vehicle, and the specifics of what had transpired. Within 10 minutes or so, two police officers came, followed quickly after. My voice was quivering as I tried to relate what had just happened. The security guard who had been approaching when the SUV was removed, Officers Martinez and Chen, were extremely meticulous, documenting every detail I could recall, including the baseball cap guy's smooth speech, the hoodie guy's gruff voice, the black SUV with what appeared to be a dented rear bumper, and even the fact that the box officer Chen said they'd been receiving more reports lately of suspicious activity in various parking lots around town. And they were happy I asked for help with something that had appeared suspiciously light and manageable. They took me through the timeline several times, and I appreciated that they never made me feel like I was being dramatic or overreacting. About 20 minutes into my statement, Officer Martinez informed me that he had been on his radio with dispatch and other units, and that, apparently, there had been another incident just 3 days prior at a different Walmart across the street. This really rocked me, because I trusted my gut and made noise rather than complying with what the men wanted. Two men who fit the same description approached a woman in her early 20s in town. telling her that they needed assistance loading something heavy into their car. The woman actually started to walk toward their car to offer assistance, but she had a bad feeling and decided not to. Officer Martinez stated that they were now investigating this as a pattern that might be related to some recent reports of attempted kidnappings in the area. She had reported it, but was unable to obtain a license plate number. Instead, the men had followed her partially before giving up and leaving, stepping up patrols around nearby malls, particularly in the evenings when college students usually shop. The officers accompanied me until I was comfortable enough to drive home and followed me to my apartment building to ensure my safety. Officer Cheng gave me his card and instructed me to call right away if I saw anything fishy. I recalled any more information regarding the incident that night, which I hardly slept at all, mentally reliving every second and considering all the things that might have gone wrong. If I had been Juster, I kept thinking about what might have happened if I had approached to assist with that box, if I hadn't screamed when the baseball cap guy grabbed my arm, or if there hadn't been other people present to observe what was happening. As a result, I became a little more trusting and less conscious of my surroundings. This is what happened to me last Tuesday, and I'm still trying to figure out what went wrong. A typical evening could turn into something dangerous, and it's crucial to trust your instincts when something doesn't seem right, even if you can't pinpoint the exact cause. I'm Marcus, 34. All I wanted to do was get some groceries in a six-pack before going home to my empty apartment and maybe watch the game, because the Arizona heat was still unbearable at 7 p.m. Had just finished a grueling 12-hour shift as a foreman pouring concrete for this new strip mall downtown in Phoenix when everything went awry. It had to be above 105, and I was worn out and covered in concrete dust. To be honest, I wasn't thinking as clearly as I should have because my truck's air conditioner had been acting up for weeks. I parked my beat-up Ford F-150 near the back of the lot, away from the other cars, because I was actually looking forward to getting into that blessed Walmart air conditioning. I never imagined that a simple grocery run would turn into the most embarrassing experience of my adult life. It made a strange grinding noise every time I turned it on. The parking lot was crowded with the typical evening population last month, including families with yelling children, adolescents sitting around their cars with music playing, older people going slowly with their walkers, and others, as I always do, since some moron knocked on my driver's side door. On a normal Tuesday night at the city's busiest Walmart, I took my wallet from the center console, made sure I had my debit card, and began to make my way toward the entrance. The asphalt was so hot that I could feel it through the thick soreness of my work boots, and the smell of exhaust fumes and melting tar was causing me to feel queasy. I was perhaps halfway to the entrance when this man suddenly materialized, as if he had been hiding behind the cars or something. He appeared to be of average height, in his early 40s, and was dressed in crisp khakis and a polo shirt that shouted Suburban Dad. What struck me, I was most struck by how unremarkable he looked. Brown hair with a hint of grey at the temples, glasses that looked pricey, a wedding ring on his finger, and how he was carrying this enormous box, which must have been at least 3 feet long, and quite heavy judging by the way he was struggling with it. The box was taped shut with that transparent packaging. The tape was from an electronics store, and I could tell by the partially visible logo on one side that the guy was really stressed out. He kept moving the box's weight from one arm to the other, and when he saw me, his expression brightened as if I were his salvation. "Excuse me, sir," he said. He continued to place the box on the hot asphalt while using the back of his hand to wipe perspiration from his forehead. "I know this is going to sound weird," he said, with a desperate edge that instantly made me want to help, "but I really need someone to help me return this thing inside. My wife bought it online." For a while he gestured helplessly at the box, then took out his wallet and showed me the receipt, which looked official enough with the Walmart logo. "But it's the wrong model, and she's going to kill me if I don't get it back today. The only issue is that I forgot my ID at the time." He seemed so relatable with his self-deprecating laugh when he said, I'll give you $40 cash right now if you'll just walk in there and return this for me. I have the receipt, everything is legit, just need someone home like an idiot, and they won't let me return anything without its store policy. $40 was $40, especially after the week I'd been there. Our crew had been behind schedule all month, which meant more stress and longer hours, but at the same time, my rent was due in 3 days, and my checking account was looking quite good. I had to present an ID to customer service. Nevertheless, the man appeared sincere enough, as a stressed-out husband attempting to correct a mistake before his wife discovered it. We've all been there. He even showed me a picture on his phone of what appeared to be his family at a restaurant, grinning, with a wife and 2 children, the classic suburban dream. I'm desperate here, man. I've been driving around for an hour trying to figure out what to do. The money looks real, and honestly, the whole situation seemed more embarrassing for him than anything else. Plus, what's the worst that could happen? He added, hastily taking 2 crisp $20 bills out of his wallet and holding them out. I could walk in, hand over a receipt in a box, and walk out with cash or store credit. I looked at the receipt again, and everything seemed to be in order. The item number matched the information on the box's side, and the date was 3 days ago. The total came to $247.99, and the man was obviously bouncing on his feet. I'll assist you out, I promise. I've been there myself with gift blunders, so I'm eager to get this whole issue fixed. His relief was instantaneous, and his shoulders were completely sincere. Oh man, thank you so much. You have no idea how much this helps, he said, bending down to pick up the box, which appeared heavy. When he handed it to me, I could feel the weight of whatever electronics were inside shifting around the box. He actually looked like he might cry a little. He stated that, if his wife had already seen it, simply go to customer service, show them your ID, and hand over the receipt and the box. As I repositioned my grasp on the package, he said, the tape had been cut and reapplied. So it made sense. He was already backing away toward the line of cars and pulled out his phone, if he was going to call someone. I'll wait right here by my silver Honda. If you're wondering if there's something wrong with it, just tell them that it's the incorrect model. It happens all the time. It should take maybe 5 minutes. Accordingly, he gestured hazily toward a portion of the parking lot where I could make out a number of silver cars. You were truly a lifesaver, and my wife Jennifer will be extremely relieved when I tell her that everything has been resolved. The entire exchange had taken about 3 minutes, and as I approached, the automatic door swooshed open, and the blast of cold air hit me like a wall through the sweltering parking lot. I was already considering what I would buy with that $40, maybe some good steaks instead of the cheap hamburger meat I'd been living on. As I walked into the Walmart entrance with this stranger's box under my arm, I headed toward the customer service counter, which was close to the front entrance next to the pharmacy. There was a short line, maybe 3 people ahead of me, so I got in line. The store was bustling with the usual evening activity, families pushing overloaded carts, employees replenishing shelves, and the continuous beeping of checkout scanners. While waiting in line, a middle-aged woman in front of me was debating a return policy for some cleaning supplies. Her voice was growing louder and more agitated by the minute, and a young woman behind the counter was arguing. The box wasn't particularly heavy, but it was awkward to hold, and I kept moving it from one arm to the other. It was just another typical evening of Walmart customer service, with a worker who couldn't have been older than 19 attempting to maintain composure while obviously becoming agitated. When it was my turn, I approached the counter and put the box down with a slight thump. Employee Tyler, whose name tag said Tyler, glanced up at me with weary eyes and said, "Hey, what can I do for you tonight?" I gave him the receipt and indicated the box, which said, "I need to return this sound system because it appears to be the wrong model." Taking the receipt, Tyler began scanning it into his computer while nodding as if this were the most regular thing ever. Nothing goes wrong every day. Could I please see your ID? I took out my driver's license and gave it to him. Watching us, he compared the name on it to something on his screen. His demeanor shifted from one of casual boredom to one of perplexity, and then worrying. He gazed at his computer screen for what seemed like an eternity, before turning back to my ID, and then to the box. Sir, Tyler murmured his "Can you wait here for just a second?" said the suddenly unsure voice. "I'm going to need to get my manager." Before I could even after responding, he hurried off toward the back office area, leaving me standing there with the box and receipt on the counter. I could feel the people in line behind me growing impatient, and I knew that something was obviously wrong, but I couldn't tell if it was because the return policy had changed, or there was a problem with the receipt, or the computer system was down. I tried to remain composed, but my thoughts were racing through all the possible outcomes. 2 minutes later, Tyler returned with an elderly woman wearing a blue vest with the word manager embroidered on it. She gave me the look you give someone who is going to hear terrible news, and she picked up the receipt and began typing quickly on the computer keyboard. "Sir, I'm Linda, the evening manager," she said, not raising her head from the screen. "I need to ask you some questions about this return." "Where did you purchase this item?" she asked, and that question really got my attention. I pointed to the ticket, which was Unexpected, and she nodded slowly while continuing to type. "When did you purchase it?" I was starting to get anxious, because, based on the receipt, Linda finally glanced up 3 days ago. I stared at her blankly asking, "Can you tell me what method of payment you used?" Perhaps she exchanged a look with Tyler that made my stomach turn, but I'm not sure if it was cash. "This item was reported stolen from our electronics department, sir. The serial number and the word stolen hit me like a kick to the belly this morning." "What the hell was she talking about?" I exclaimed, my voice rising above usual. "A man in the parking lot requested me to return this for him. His wife purchased the incorrect model, and he gave me $40 on the receipt." Linda's face became even more grave, and she gestured for me to move away from the counter. Tyler then appeared, gently but firmly, and said, "Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside while I call security. This is a very serious matter." I was shown to a small office space close to the customer service desk, and as I waited there watching Linda make phone calls, I couldn't stop wondering how this could be happening. The receipt looked authentic, the man seemed genuine, and everything had seemed regular. Security arrived in a matter of minutes. Two men in uniform, who appeared to be serious about their business, arrived. They weren't harsh with me, but they made it apparent that I had been set up and made an unwitting collaborator in some sort of theft plot that I didn't even understand. Wasn't leaving until this was resolved, so Linda gave me the rundown on what had happened. As I stood there feeling like the biggest fool in Arizona, they made me give a statement detailing everything that had happened in the parking lot, including the man who had approached me in as much detail as I could recall. Then came the part that truly made me want to. We all crammed into a little office behind customer service, where Linda turned on the parking lot cameras on her computer. What we watched made my skin crawl. The man who was clearly approaching me, with his box and his sober narrative, but that wasn't the worst part. As Linda went over the film from earlier days, we noticed that the same man had been approaching 3 other people over the previous week, the parking lot, with the same box and the same desperate performance. Officer Rodriguez was actually rather understanding after hearing the entire tale and seeing the security footage, even though I had just fallen for the same fraud. The police arrived about 20 minutes later, and I had to make another statement. "You're not the first person who has experienced this." He informed me that these return scams are becoming increasingly complex. The individual most likely stole the goods, made a phony receipt, and then tried to get cash back from innocent people. He clarified that I wouldn't face any charges because it was obvious that I was unaware of the theft. It was nearly 1000 p.m., 3 hours of my life, but I would have to be accessible as they captured the man and required me to testify by the time everything was resolved and I was finally let to leave. As I walked back through the parking lot toward my vehicle, I scanned every silver car I passed, knowing full well that suburban parents with a lot of money had wasted $40 and had it confiscated as proof. It was the most embarrassing experience I had had since high school. After 8 hours of looking at spreadsheets at the accounting company where I worked, after lugging a cart through Walmart's fluorescent-lit aisles, Tuesday afternoons were always set aside for food shopping. His ideal scenario was long gone. Actually, it was therapeutic. My name is Danielle, and I've been going through this same routine for the past 3 years since my divorce. I park near the garden center, take a cart, and start with vegetables before moving on to frozen foods at the store beside Highway 169 in Minneapolis. Was typically packed about 6 p.m., but it was bearable that night in early October. The chilly fall air made me thankful for my cardigan, and I can still recall singing along to whatever pop music was playing in the background. I was squeezing avocados without realizing that my monotonous pattern had drawn attention. He approached me in the vegetable area as I was comparing the costs of bagged salads when I heard my name, Danielle. Not I turned around to see a man standing about 3 feet away, close enough to smell his woody, overpowering fragrance. He appeared to be in his early 40s, average height, wearing a grey hoodie and a faded Twins baseball cap. His face seemed to he had pale blue eyes that didn't quite focus on mine, as if he was staring at something just past my ear. I smiled politely, the way you do when you can't place someone but don't want to be impolite. He was vaguely familiar in the sense that you might have seen someone at a gas station or in line at Starbucks. I questioned, shifting my weight and tightening my grip on the cart handle. I'm sorry, do we know each other? He cocked his head slightly and his lips curled into a tiny smile that tightened my chest. Danielle, you don't I really like it when you wear your hair like that. He continued to gesture hazily toward my ponytail and braid. His voice was quiet, almost disappointed. He took a step closer, and I saw that his sneakers were immaculate white, as if they had just been taken out of the box. Thursdays are also nice, but this works better for you. I was trying to figure out how this stranger knew about my Thursday braid, which I always did for our weekly team meetings, and I managed to mumble something about being rushed and turning my cart toward the deli section while walking more quickly than I had to. The deli counter had a short wait, which ordinarily would have irritated me, but at the moment I was thankful for the company and pretended to look over the menu. My heart was pounding, but I told myself I was overreacting. Perhaps he worked in my building, or perhaps he was simply socially awkward. I ordered a pound of turkey while attempting to control my breathing, but the youngster behind the counter phoned my number. I told myself that Minneapolis was full of strange people, but as I waited for my order, I couldn't find him. 10 minutes later, I was in the cereal aisle, arguing between granola and Special K, when I saw him again. He was at the far end of the aisle, holding a box of Frosted Flakes, but his eyes were on me this time. I stopped thinking about how he had pronounced my name if he had been practicing it. Didn't approach, I just stood there observing. I gave up on my cereal mission and made my way to the pharmacy section, taking a roundabout route through sporting goods and automobiles. My cart contained maybe 5 items, and it was far from my usual weekly haul, but I was beginning to consider leaving when I realized the store was too large and too empty. The pharmacy area was busier with people waiting for prescriptions and looking at cold medications at the same time. Those overhead lights that normally didn't bother me seemed harsh and exposing like being on stage. I ducked into the shampoo aisle and pretended to read the labels in an attempt to relax when I heard the squeak of cartwheel stopping. He was relishing my name in his mouth like a piece of candy, and I didn't have to turn around to realize it was him, since the cologne behind my was unmistakably Danielle. You use the lavender shampoo, don't you? I can smell it sometimes when you pass by my constricted throat. where I reached for the closest bottle without looking and practically threw it in my cart. When I turned to face him closely, I saw more details, like a tiny scar through his left eyebrow, neatly manicured fingernails, and an expensive-looking gold watch that said, "Look, I don't know who you are, but you should stop following me," I said, startled by how steady my voice sounded. He blinked slowly, like a cat, and that tiny smile reappeared. "Danielle, we're just shopping at the same store. Don't you think you're being a little paranoid?" The way he said paranoid made it sound like he grabbed a bottle of conditioner and reached past me, brushing my arm. I jerked away, thinking, "You know stress isn't good for you." He went on, "Perhaps you should try that meditation app you downloaded last month, the one with the brushish lady's voice." Shampoo fell out of my hand and landed loudly on the floor. How could he have known about that app? I had only mentioned it to my sister over the phone. I left the bottle on the floor and pushed my card away as quickly as I could, but my mind was yelling for me to get out. I came to the front of the store and saw the long lines at the self-checkout, but the stubborn part insisted that I was being ridiculous and that there had to be an explanation. Perhaps he worked for the app company, or had heard me discussing it somewhere. I figured there was safety in numbers and decided to take a regular line behind a woman with 2 children and the cart full of groceries, because the area was closer and less crowded, but it was also more secluded, tucked into a corner. That's when I saw him for the 3rd time. He was in the next line, over just a people ahead of me, purchasing only 3 items, the frosted flanking a package of zip ties, and a disposable camera. Who even used those anymore? He was putting his belongings on the belt without glancing at me this time, but his posture gave me the impression that he knew exactly where I was, as the woman in front of me was rummaging through her bag for coupons. Her children were fighting over candy, and all I could see was the back of his grey sweatshirt. The cashier gave him his receipt, and when he turned to face me, he winked and went to the adolescent cashier, scanned my pitiful assortment of items, which included turkey shampoo, a bag of salad yogurt, and a box of crackers that I couldn't even recall grabbing. But instead of walking away, he stopped close to the customer service desk and pretended to check his phone. "Did you find everything okay?" I wanted to laugh, cry, or take her by the shoulders and ask whether she had ever seen that man before, but I just nodded and stumbled for my answer when she inquired in that robotic retail voice. My hands were shaking as I placed the chip into my credit card, and I kept looking at customer service. He was still there, resting against the lottery ticket display, and the receipt printed painfully slowly. As I picked up my one bag, I decided I wasn't. The walk through the store felt endless, past the Halloween decorations that had been up since August, past the pet supplies around the wall of fish tanks, and I kept checking behind me, but couldn't see anything. I would exit the main exit and head back through the store and out the garden center where I had parked. When the automatic doors opened to the parking lot, the crisp October air touched my face like a godsend, and my car, my familiar blue Honda, was precisely where I'd left it. The garden center was dark and mostly deserted, with only one staffer watering the mums. I practically jogged to it after pressing the unlock button from 20 feet away, but it wasn't until I was inside with the doors locked and the passenger seat stained by coffee and the dream catcher hanging from the mirror, gift from my niece, that I let myself truly look in the rearview mirror. I sat there for a minute, allowing the adrenaline to subside, telling myself that the journey home was a haze, and I kept checking my mirrors, taking strange turns, and doubling back once to make sure no one was following me. I saw the store door, but there was no trace of the grey hoodie man. I dumped the Walmart bag on the counter and noticed that I was still wearing my work clothes, my blouse damp with anxiety. The underground parking garage of the apartment building had never seemed so inviting inside my apartment. I deadbolted the door and put the chain on, something I rarely did. Sweat, I changed into my pajamas, poured a huge glass of wine, and sat on my couch to try to figure out what had happened. Should I call the police and tell them that a man in Walmart spoke to me and knew information about me? They would likely say that he was just a stalker who had discovered my social media. I took out my phone, checked my privacy settings on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and everything else. I made them even more secret. And then I googled myself to discover that all that appeared was my company bio and a few race results from a 5K had run 2 years prior. The following morning seemed almost normal. By the time I got home on Wednesday night, I had nearly forgotten about the entire situation because I was heating up leftover Chinese food when my phone rang. I had convinced myself that perhaps the guy was just someone from my building or gym who had an awkward crush. I threw myself into work, staying late to finish a report that wasn't due for a week. Rang with a friend request on Facebook. The name was generic Robert Smith, and the profile was obviously newly made that day. But the picture on the profile, a picture shot in the Walmart parking lot, was what caused me to drop my phone. The timestamp indicated that it was taken Tuesday evening, right around the time I'd been sitting in my car, thinking I was safe. I didn't sleep that night, so I called in sick on Thursday, something I never did, and spent the day installing new locks and a security system. The garden center entrance was in the background, and my blue Honda was in the foreground, slightly blurry, but unmistakable. I bought a security camera system with overnight delivery, and when I filed a police report and showed them the Facebook profile, the officer sounded doubtful and remarked, "Could be anyone," suggesting that it might be a prank. I wanted to yell at him about the shampoo, the meditation app, and the way the man had called my name, but I knew it would sound like that. By Friday, I was back at work, jittery and worn out, and I flinched whenever my name was spoken. Began going to a different grocery store that was far from my normal haunts, changed my hairstyle from a ponytail to a down style, got a personal safety app, and gave my sister my location. For weeks, I searched everywhere for that grey hoodie, but I never found it. Though I never returned to that Walmart, I still occasionally wonder how he knew those details about me and what he wanted. Eventually, life returned to something like normal when I saw him again. The Facebook page vanished after a few days, and no fresh requests arrived. Let me tell you what happened at my local Walmart last Tuesday afternoon. My name is Eric, and I'm 43. I work as an electrician here, and I'm mainly thankful that our weird encounter ended with nothing more than dread. Not everyone who encounters a stranger who knows too much about them can say the same. I typically avoid shopping on weekdays, but my wife Jennifer in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, phoned me after lunch to ask if I could pick up some groceries on my way home because she was occupied with meetings all day. We needed milk, bread, and a few other necessities, and the supermarket was unusually packed for a Tuesday. At around 3:00 p.m. collected what we needed and went over there, already mentally preparing for the routine struggle with those fussy machines that never seemed to cooperate. Since most of the regular checkout lanes were closed and people were lining up for the self-checkout section, it took me 2 attempts to successfully scan my products on the first try, since the self-checkout area was crowded with roughly 8 machines operating and a queue of people waiting their turn. Eventually, I reached a machine near the end, the one closest to the exit doors, and it began scanning my items. The milk went through fine bread. The bananas required the produce code to be manually entered, and as I was doing so, I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. A woman in her early 30s, dressed in a faded pink hoodie and trousers, was standing uncomfortably close to my left side. She was blonde. She was holding a receipt in one hand and carrying a big canvas tote bag over her shoulder. Her hair was pulled back in an untidy ponytail, and she had an anxious demeanor due to her frequent shifting of weight from foot to foot. "Excuse me, sir. I'm so sorry to bother you," she said. The screen stopped as she continued. "I just used the machine next to yours, and I think it charged me twice for everything." Her voice was high-pitched and sounded like she was in real trouble. I tried to ask the attendant for assistance, but she said she couldn't do anything about refunds at this time. I paid, and now my receipt shows double charges. She waved the receipt in front of me, but she kept it moving, so I couldn't actually read anything on it. Her eyes were darting between me, the machine, and the store entrance. I know this is strange to ask, but could you please help me figure out what happened? Perhaps if we run your card, she said. I'll have to go to customer service because the line is crazy and I have to pick up my daughter from daycare in 20 minutes. I ran my card through a transaction screen, which made no sense because these machines don't operate that way after a transaction. It will show you what went wrong. The way she stated it triggered every internal alarm. I've used self-checkout hundreds of times over the years, and there is no feature that allows you to do what she was describing. In addition, her story kept changing slightly. First the machine froze, then it charged her twice. It's complete. You can't just go back and review it, especially not with someone else's payment method. She then needed my card to show me something, but nothing added up, so I took a closer look at her. She claimed to be in a hurry, but she seemed willing to stand there for however long it took to persuade me. Her tote bag was strangely held open at the top, as if she was about to quickly drop something into it. As I continued scanning my items, I said, I understand that you're having trouble, but I don't think my card would help with your situation, because these machines don't allow you to review past transactions like that. I turned slightly away from her in the hopes that she would take the hint, but she didn't move and instead stepped closer. No, you don't understand, she insisted, her voice becoming more urgent. The attendant showed me this special diagnostic mode. See, if you put your card in and press cancel 3 times, it brings up the transaction history for the machine. Then, I can show you. I could smell her perfume, which was floral and way too strong. You know exactly where it went wrong, because she was already reaching for the card reader on my computer, her fingers hovering over the slot, as if she were about to direct my hand there. At that point, I noticed something else odd. Her tote bag appeared incredibly light, and I could see that, partially, there was nothing you'd expect from someone who had just been double charged for their purchases: a wallet, some crumpled papers, and what appeared to be a little electronic device I couldn't quite identify. No groceries, no shopping bags, and now that I actually looked at her receipt, when I saw that she was holding it so that her thumb covered the majority of the text, I said more firmly, look, I need to finish checking out. The customer service desk is right over there, pointing across the store. The paper itself appeared to have been handled a lot and wasn't brand new from a printer. Assist you correctly resolve this. Her demeanor changed immediately, her eyes hardened, and she snapped. I was only attempting to spare us both some time, and you could have explained what had happened to me, but she retreated nevertheless. However, I noticed that she was looking at my wallet as I took it out to retrieve my debit card, rather than going to customer service, as you might anticipate someone with a serious issue doing. She went to another self-checkout machine where an elderly man was just beginning to scan his belongings. I watched as she approached him with I could hear her beginning the same spiel about being double charged and needing help from where I stood, and I completed my transaction quickly while keeping a close eye on her the entire time. The elderly man she had approached appeared perplexed by her request, and I saw him. She was also holding the same receipt. I grabbed my bags and headed for the exit, but something made me pause. She continued, shaking his head, and then went on to a woman with 2 small children who was having trouble managing her groceries and keeping the kids from running off. This time, the woman seemed more sympathetic, actually pausing what she was doing to listen. Wanted to warn the woman, but I also didn't want to make a scene or misjudge the situation, so I hesitated. A store employee wearing a yellow vest saw the exchange and began to approach the blonde woman, who saw him approaching and immediately excused herself, going deeper into the store rather than out. I left the store after vanishing down one of the aisles and packing my groceries into my truck, but the entire experience stayed with me. On the way home, I couldn't stop thinking about the gadget I had seen in her bag. It resembled a card skimmer, One of those devices you hear about criminals installing on ATMs. However, even though she hadn't touched my card or the machine's reader, something about the whole situation felt off. So I made the decision to monitor my bank account in case Jennifer was already there when I got home after leaving her meetings. Early, I told her about the strange experience. While putting away the groceries, she acknowledged that it sounded like a scam attempt and advised me to check my account immediately for peace of mind. Everything appeared normal, except for the $4,783 Walmart charge, which was exactly what I had paid. The rest of the evening proceeded as usual. We had dinner, watched TV, and I forgot about the around 9:30 that evening. As I was getting ready for bed, I received a text alert from my bank saying, "Unusual activity detected on your debit card ending in 48. It was a weird woman at Walmart. 29. My stomach dropped when I saw 3 additional pending charges totaling $199 when I accessed my banking app. Did you authorize a payment of $389 to tech deals online? 52. 67 to 3. A digital gaming retailer to a wholesale center for electronics, and $89.99 to a company, Quick Ship Direct, and every online purchase I displayed had been made within the previous hour. Jennifer helped me deal with it by grabbing her laptop and calling the bank's fraud department. I tried to figure out how this happened because I had only used my card at Walmart that day, and I had made sure not to give anyone my information. The bank's fraud department was helpful, was overloaded, as it appears they had been receiving similar calls all evening. The agent instantly cancelled my card and said they would look into the charges. She then inquired about my recent purchases, pausing when I brought up the Walmart self-checkout. "Sir," as I told the representative about the blonde woman and her story of being double-charged, the representative's tone changed. "We've received several reports today of fraudulent charges related to interactions at that particular Walmart. Did anyone approach you while you were using the self-checkout, perhaps asking for assistance or attempting to approach your transaction?" I drove back to Walmart the following morning and asked to speak with the person. "Can you recall if this person had any devices with them? Some criminals use portable skimmers that can read card information from a short distance, especially if they can get you to insert your card while they're nearby with the device activated. I was shown to a small office behind customer service by the head of security, a man named Robert. As soon as I described the woman, he instantly played video from the previous day. "We've been tracking her for about a week now," he said, turning his monitor so I could see she always shows up every few days. He played footage from various days while she was approaching different customers at self-checkout wearing the same pink hoodie and tote bag. "We've had at least 12 people report fraudulent charges after dealing with her, and she never actually purchases anything. She just walks around with that old receipt." He zoomed in on one of them. Robert explained that they had been working with local police to catch her, but she was cautious and never stayed in the frame where her tote bag was more visible. "We believe that device is a modified RFID reader, and when people insert their cards to pay, if she's close enough and the device is positioned correctly, it can capture the card information." Long consistently departed when staff members arrived and appeared to be aware of the camera blind spots. He acknowledged that the scam is cunning because she tricked people into repeatedly inserting their cards by presenting them with a story about diagnostic mode or the transaction history, which gave her device another chance to read it. He showed me reports from other victims who all told similar stories of being approached while using self-checkout and having fraudulent charges appear hours later. The police had planned a sting operation for later that week in the hopes of apprehending her. Some of these portable skimmers can capture information from as far as 3 feet away if the right conditions are met. 3 days after the incident, I received a call from the bank informing me that all of the fraudulent charges had been reversed and that I would be receiving a new card with more security features. The investigator informed me that they had linked the fraudulent purchases to IP addresses connected to a larger theft ring that was active in multiple states. About a week after that, I saw on the local news that police had arrested a woman at our Walmart for identity theft and fraud. The footage showed someone wearing a pink hoodie being led away in handcuffs. Robert from security called me later. This case was one of many that Walmart had helped them identify a pattern in order to verify that it was the same woman who had approached me. They discovered that she was in possession of several card skimming devices and that there was evidence connecting her to more than 50 fraud cases in our area alone. She had been engaging in this behavior for months, switching between stores while always following the same perplexed shopper routine. She needed people to keep inserting their cards because a tiny device in her tote bag seemed to be able to record card information using the electromagnetic field produced when a card's chip was activated, but only if she could get close enough during the precise moment of the transaction. Chances of receiving a clean read, the entire experience taught me to follow my gut and never allow strangers to influence my financial transactions, no matter how plausible their story may seem. I had 4 days to find something respectable to wear to my cousin Vanessa's engagement party online. Shopping wasn't an option. My name is Mia, and I work as a dental hygienist at Brookdale Dental downtown. Tuesday had been especially stressful because I had to complete 8 hours of cleanings, to challenging root canals, and a child bit me when he was getting checked out. All I wanted to do at 5:30 p.m. was go home, pour myself a glass of wine, and binge watch something stupid on Netflix. But Vanessa's party was on Saturday, and I didn't have anything suitable in my closet, so I dragged myself to the Walmart on. I parked close to the entrance, grabbed my bag, and went into Harrison Boulevard, thinking I could find something reasonably priced and be home in an hour. The parking lot appeared nearly deserted in contrast to its typical bustle, with about 15 cars strewn across the enormous area. The store was different than usual, quieter, practically empty, and the women's apparel section stretched out to my right, with racks of summer dresses and blouses organized in neat rows under those bright overhead lights. I was totally ignorant that I was entering a nightmare. I picked up a navy blue dress that looked professional enough for Vanessa's country club venue after grabbing a shopping basket, a floral skirt, a cream-colored blouse with pearl buttons, and a jumpsuit that I wasn't sure I could pull off, but wanted to try anyway, were some other items that caught my eye. Aside from an elderly woman studying clearance items close to the back wall, the entire area was deserted. She kept muttering to herself about the prices, while holding shirts up to the light and squinting at the fabric, if she was searching for flaws. I walked past her and headed to the fitting rooms, my arms full of possible outfits. There were 6 separate stalls set up in an L shape in the back corner of the women's section, with a full-length mirror at the end of the hallway. No staff member was working at the desk, where they typically count your belongings and assign you a number, and the handwritten sign that was taped to the counter said, "Please limit the corridor in blue marker smelt like a combination of fresh carpet and that unique Walmart smell, which is somewhat plastic-like, and to 6 items on a system today." I chose the middle stall number 3 on the left side of the industrial cleaner because the door was already partially open and the light was on inside. The tiny room had hooks on 3 walls, a narrow bench on the back wall, and a mirror that took up the majority of the door. I hung my purse on one hook and considered my options, outfits on the others, and I began with the navy dress. It fit me better than I had anticipated, hugging in all the right places without being too tight, and it hit just above my knees. As I was examining it from various perspectives, I noticed that the ceiling light flickered above me, not a dramatic strobe effect. There was a slight dimming and brightening that gave the impression that my reflection in the mirror pulsed. Fluorescent bulbs occasionally did that when they were about to burn out, so I didn't give it much thought. I took off the dress and reached for the floral skirt and cream blouse. They looked nice together, but they felt too casual for Vanessa's fancy. I thought it was a loose thread from one of the clothes when a tiny piece of white material drifted down onto my bare shoulder while I was adjusting the blouse collar. But when I looked at my hand, I saw it was actually a tiny piece of ceiling tile dust that was chalky and gritty between my fingers. The fitting room's ceiling tiles were the typical white squares you see everywhere, secured in place by a metal grid. The one directly above me had a dark gap along one edge, perhaps half an inch wide, as if it had been pushed up and hadn't settled back properly. More dust. This was a reflex, similar to how you'd check for a leak if you felt a drop of water. I was standing there in my bra and the flowery skirt, staring at the gap as particles drifted down through it like small snowflakes visible in the flickering light, when I noticed something that made every muscle in my body tense. Two pale fingers emerged at the edge of the tile. Clutching it from above, they moved slowly and purposefully, sliding the tile back another inch behind those fingers. In the darkness above, I could just make out the mouth and chin of someone's face, and before I could even comprehend what I was witnessing, I screamed. The older woman from the clearance section was suddenly there, her eyes wide with shock as I blasted past. It was one of those deep primal screams that begin in your stomach and end with tears in your throat. I yanked the door of the changing room open so hard that it slammed against the wall, and I ran out into the hallway, wearing only my bra in that floral skirt. I started yelling at her, pointing back toward the changing room. There's someone in the ceiling. Someone's up there. Call security. The woman fumbled with her phone as I pressed myself against the far wall, unable to stop staring at the fitting room door, as if whoever was up there might crawl out at any moment. Within minutes, two security guards arrived, one of whom was a younger man named Connor. My voice sounded hysterical, even to my own ears, high-pitched and cracking. When I told him what had happened, Connor gave me his jacket to cover myself. While Earl radioed for help, Earl had the worn-out expression that more security guards have perfected over the years, with acne scars on his cheeks and an older man whose name tag read Earl in faded letters. Earl entered stall number 3 with a flashlight, and I saw him shine it up through the opening in the ceiling as he and the store manager emptied out the fitting room space and covered it with yellow tape, as if it were a crime scene, which I suppose it was. His entire manner abruptly altered. "Holy shit," he murmured, and then louder Connor called the actual police. The police arrived in force, including 4 policemen at first, then more as word spread about what they had discovered. They also hauled in a ladder and evacuated the entire women's section. I watched officers go up into the ceiling one by one, while sitting on a bench close to customer service, still wearing Connor's security jacket over my bra. Earl kept in touch with me occasionally to give me updates on what was going on. And the man they discovered up there was Marcus Fitzgerald, 34, unemployed, with he had been residing in Phoenix for 3 months when he was arrested for voyeurism at a gym. Based on what the police pieced together, he had been preparing this 4 weeks, analyzing the store's structure, determining the staff schedules, and identifying a maintenance on Tuesday. When the store opened at 7 a.m., he entered through an access panel in a storage room that led to the crawl area above the fitting rooms. During a shift change, I sneaked inside that storage area and scaled the ceiling to wait, but when they brought him down, I saw him being led away in handcuffs. Marcus was thinner than I had thought, dressed in dark clothing covered in insulation, dust and cobwebs, and his face had a blank expression that suggested he was bored or annoyed rather than having been apprehended for a crime. Using a sleeping bag, water bottles, protein bars, a portable battery pack, and, worst of all, a phone on a tiny tripod pointing down through a hole he painstakingly bored above fitting room 3. He also carefully drilled holes above stalls. To Ann 4, a woman named Patricia Chen informed me that the detective who took my statement had discovered over 400 videos on his phone going back 3 weeks, featuring 400 women and girls who believed they were alone and were unaware that someone was observing them at their most vulnerable times. Bradley, the store manager, was a nervous man who kept wiping his sweaty forehead. He gave me a $500 gift card and had someone get my clothes and purse out of the changing room. He apologized maybe 20 times in 10 minutes, brought up safety, inspections and corporate policy, and essentially pleaded with me not to sue something I wasn't even considering. Lawsuits. All I wanted to do was go home and take a shower until my skin turned red. Detective Chen took me home because I was too unsteady to drive myself, and she explained that Marcus had probably picked that specific Walmart because of the building's older design, which included an unusually large crawl space that was intended in order to make place for VUC systems from the 1990s that had since been modernized. He had effectively discovered a secret apartment above the changing rooms with enough room to roam about and lie down comfortably without creating any noise. That night, I was unable to sleep. I imagined someone hiding above my bedroom ceiling, listening through crevices I had never noticed before. I searched every vent and light fixture in my apartment, even bringing a chair into my closet to examine the attic access panel, which I had never noticed until my roommate. At 3 a.m., Sarah discovered me. She made me tea and sat with me while I told her everything, her face getting thinner by the minute, and we ended up sleeping in the kitchen while I stood there shining a flashlight into the air vent above the stove. It took months before I was allowed to use a public changing room again, and even now, she helped me install new locks, a security system, and these motion sensor cameras that notify my phone if anything moves while I'm not home the next day. We left the living room together, all the lights on like young children terrified of the dark. Marcus Fitzgerald pleaded guilty to several charges, including voyeurism, criminal trespass, and possession of unlawful recordings. He spent 7 years in prison for these offences. I always start by looking up every tile, vent, and potential hiding place. Chen called me after he was sentenced to inform me that the investigation resulted in new security procedures at all Walmart stores in the area. They now perform daily ceiling inspections and have motion sensors installed in the crawl spaces. He will also have to register as a sex offender for life. I ended up wearing an old dress to Vanessa's engagement party, one I'd worn to a dozen events before she asked why I hadn't gotten a new one. I simply smiled and changed the topic, but it doesn't change what happened or erase the violation that all 400 of us experienced. Some stories aren't meant for parties, aren't they? Intended for informal discussion, but I post it online in forums, where anyone may see it and decide to look it up the next time they're in a dressing room, because predators like Marcus rely on us not looking up and thinking we're safe in those tiny, private areas. Now that I know better, and I'll never stop checking. I graduated from high school in June of last year, and like most people my age, I was frantically looking for summer employment before enrolling in community college the following fall. My parents had been worried about receiving a job since March, reminding me repeatedly that I needed to learn responsibility and that money doesn't grow on trees. I spent weeks completing online applications at McDonald's, Target, grocery stores, and other establishments. The rejections kept coming in, and to be honest, my confidence was pretty low. Shoot. And then one Tuesday in early July, I received an email from Walmart requesting me to come in for an interview the following day at 2 p.m. Had applied there weeks prior, and the message made my heart race. Totally forgot about it. The email was sufficiently professional, featured the Walmart logo, and even included detailed instructions on what to bring. My mother was overjoyed when I informed her that we had already discussed employee discounts and how this could be a great first step. I then spent the remainder of that day researching typical and choosing my nicest khakis and button-down shirt and practicing my handshake in front of the mirror. I woke up the following morning with butterflies in my stomach, since this was my first actual job interview and I wanted to make a good impression. Walmart was as busy as normal with automobiles, so my dad took me there early and gave me a pep talk about making eye contact and speaking clearly. I also looked up the store manager's name online, but I couldn't find much information. People were pushing carts full of groceries toward their cars as the enormous parking lot filled up. I entered through the automated doors with my folder of documents, resumed references, social security card, and the works. The greeter, an elderly woman with warm eyes, grinned warmly at me, and I explained that I was there for an interview, and she pointed me in the direction of customer service. But when I arrived and gave my explanation, the young woman behind the counter appeared perplexed. She called her supervisor, who also appeared perplexed, and said she would need to check with management, while I stood awkwardly close to the customer and waited. Service desk. I saw a man across the store observing me. He was likely in his 40s, dressed in khakis and a navy blue polo shirt that could have been worn by a manager, had thinning brown hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and exuded the kind of authority you'd after 10 minutes or so of waiting, as I would expect from someone in authority. He came over to me and said, "You must be Logan," holding out his hand firmly. "I'm Dale Peterson, the store manager, and I apologize for the confusion at customer service. They're still getting used to our new scheduling system." His explanation seemed reasonable enough, and I felt relieved that someone finally knew why I was there. He asked if I had my documents with me, and I showed him my folder. "Excellent," he said, glancing around the busy store. "You know where I'm renovating the back office area today, and it's quite noisy and chaotic. Would it be okay if we did the interview in my car? I have a cozy setup, and we'll be able to talk without any interruptions." The request seemed strange at first because it was unlike any job interview I had ever heard of.
Occurred in a conference room, an office, or at least someplace within the company. My mother had always advised me to follow my gut, but something about this whole circumstance felt off. Dale promptly added, "I know it's unconventional, but with the construction," he pointed to the parking lot, where I could see a big white van parked in a far corner away from the majority of the other cars. "With the noise and customers constantly interrupting, this is really the best option we have today. It will only take 15 minutes, and then I can show you around the store." I stood there for a moment, my mind racing through all the possibilities, wondering if this was typical for some companies or if they actually were. It looked clean and well-maintained, but it definitely wasn't what I'd consider a typical manager's vehicle. Most of the employees I'd seen drove regular cars or small trucks, completing renovations, but my gut told me that something wasn't right. I recalled all the safety lectures my parents had given me over the years, as well as the news reports about people who made the wrong decision at the wrong time. "You know what, Mr. Peterson," in an attempt to seem calm and kind, I answered, "I truly appreciate the opportunity, but I'd prefer to wait until the store renovations are complete so we can do this properly. Perhaps we could reschedule for later this week." "Oh, that's really not necessary," he insisted, his tone growing more urgent as though I had replied, "It'll only take a few minutes and I have other plans." His cheerful manner changed somewhat, and I saw a brief flash of annoyance in his eyes, which he soon masked with another smile. He started to walk toward the parking lot, obviously expecting me to follow, but I was told to stay put by every fiber of my being because I'd seen enough crime documentaries with my mom to know that predators frequently use jobs. Interviews are scheduled for the rest of the week, and this is really the only time slot I have available. The more he pressed, the more certain I got that this was not genuine. "I'm sorry, but I'm not comfortable with that," I responded firmly. "If this is how Walmart conducts interviews, then maybe this isn't the right fit for me." He used offers as bait, specifically targeting young people who were in dire need of employment. For a brief moment, before he caught himself, I noticed something cold and cunning in his eyes as his mask entirely fell off. After that, his entire manner altered, the phony friendliness vanished, and he became nearly, "Well, that's your choice," he stated curtly in his dismissal, "but I should let you know that we take initiative and flexibility very seriously here. Candidates who are unable to adjust to our procedures are typically not a good fit for our company culture in general." He was attempting to convince me that I was wasting a genuine chance, but I refused to back down. "I understand," I said, "but I'd still prefer to do this the traditional way." He shrugged and left without saying anything more. I saw him walk straight toward that white van from the store entrance, and what I witnessed next validated all of my suspicions. Instead of getting into the van and driving off, as you might expect someone to do after a failed interview, He stayed in the driver's seat for around 20 minutes waiting. I was observing the parking lot and saw him looking around. At one point, he even got out and went up to a young woman who was approaching the store entrance. She seemed to listen to him for a moment before shaking her head and rushing inside, which is when I realized there was definitely a serious problem with the whole thing. I returned to the supervisor from earlier, stepped out when I told what had happened to customer service and wanted to talk with the actual store manager. Her face went completely white. "Sir, I need to tell you something important," she said, dropping her voice. "We don't have anyone. Dale Peterson is employed here, and we never, ever do interviews in the parking lot." She phoned security right away and asked me to give a detailed description of the individual. As we waited for the security guard, she pulled up to the security guard, a middle-aged man named Frank, took down all the information from the store's hiring system on her computer and said, "We don't even have any interviews scheduled for today, and that all of our official communications go through our hiring portal rather than generic email addresses." Point out the van if it was still there, but by the time we were outside, Dale and his van had vanished. Frank radioed other nearby security officers and took pictures of the van's parking spot, and he informed me that I had made the right decision by following my gut. And declining to accompany the man, the security guard requested me to wait while he looked over the parking lot's security cameras. About half an hour later, he returned with some unsettling information. "This isn't the first time this week that Frank has told me. We've had at least 3 other complaints of a man matching that the cameras had recorded Dale approaching various people over the course of several days, always using the same basic script about being a manager and needing to conduct interviews away from the store when he approached young people in our parking lot with fictitious job interview stories. Most people had just walked away." Frank explained that although they had previously reported him to the police, this was the first time someone had been able to give such specific details about the man's demeanor and appearance, so I wasn't the only one who had interacted with him long enough to become suspicious. The detective working this case is going to want to the idea that I might have been in that van miles from safety had my stomach turn over, so I contacted my dad. "Talk to you," he said. "You might have just helped us catch this guy before he actually managed to hurt someone." To pick me up, and while I waited, Frank gave me a case number for reference and demonstrated how to report the incident online. When my dad arrived, I could see the worrying and rage battling on his face as I told him what had happened. He wanted to drive around the neighborhood in search of the white van, but Frank suggested that I let the police handle this, saying that since we have solid video and your thorough description, the best course of action is to go home and wait for the detective to get in touch with you. On the way home, my dad kept staring at me in the rearview mirror, presumably seeing all the "I'm proud of you for following your instincts." He said that many children your age might have joined you if they truly needed the job. That night, Detective Sarah Williams called our home. She was a member of a task force looking into similar incidents throughout the country. 3 different counties. "What you experienced fits a pattern we've been tracking for about 2 months, she said, adding, "You're the first person who was able to give us such a comprehensive account of his methods. This individual has been targeting teenagers and young adults, always using job opportunities as bait." She asked if I would be prepared to work with a sketch artist and set up a time for me to come in and make a formal statement. The following morning, I found myself working at the police station. As I attempted to remember every aspect of Dale's look, including the precise shape of his spectacles, the way his hair was parted, and even little details like a tiny scar near his left temple, a forensic artist named Janet, who specialized in these kind of cases, was extremely patient with me. "You have an excellent memory," Janet told me as the sketch took shape, "because most people only remember general features, but you're giving me specific details that could really help identify this person." I had observed that when he leaned in close, Detective Williams stated that they would be circulating the sketch to area businesses, particularly places where I had felt uneasy, because it looked precisely like the man I had met, catching the phony warmth in his demeanor. I discovered that the phony email I had received had been sent from a spoof address made to appear official, complete with stolen Walmart credentials. Young people usually applied for jobs. "We are also working with Walmart's corporate security team," she added, "and they're putting extra measures in place to prevent this kind of impersonation at all their locations. attention to local news, and sure enough, there were reports. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about how close I'd come to making a terrible mistake because of the graphics and formatting from nearby towns regarding comparable occurrences, with some parents sharing their experiences of their teenagers getting shady job interview requests that always involved meetings in cars or remote areas. The recurring theme was that young people who were actively looking for work might be desperate enough to ignore warning signs. My mother began telling other parents in our community about my experience, transforming it into a lesson about staying safe online and following your gut. The frightening thing she shared with her book group was that Logan nearly fell for it. This man understood just how to target children who were in dire need of employment. The event highlighted the vulnerability of young job seekers, particularly those of us with little experience who may not be able to spot the warning signs of predatory behavior. About 3 weeks after my encounter, Detective Williams called with an update that made me shudder. Apprehended a man who fit Dale's description after he successfully enticed a 19-year-old female into his van outside of a Target in the neighboring county. Fortunately, she was able to flee when he stopped at a red light, the detective stated, but she was able to recognize him from your we were able to find him thanks to your sketch and the vehicle description you gave. Kenneth Marsh was the man's real name, and he had a history of similar crimes going back several years. When they searched his van, they discovered duct tape, zip ties, and other items that indicated his motivations went far beyond phony job interviews. Detective Williams informed me that the decision to trust your instincts and your detailed report directly contributed to getting this dangerous individual off the streets. I was so relieved, but I was also horrified by what might have happened to me and others if I had made a different choice. The investigator informed me that my testimony was essential in determining Kenneth Marsh's pattern of action and assisting other victims in coming forward. On that day, Marsh was ultimately sentenced to 15 years in prison on several offenses, including attempted kidnapping, impersonation, and fraud. Most people assumed that I should have my life together by now, but following my divorce last year, this job became my lifeline. My name is Nina, and I have been a part of the midnight cleaning crew at the Supercenter on Route 46 at 40 for the past 3 years. Working nights at Walmart isn't glamorous, but it covers the bills. The income isn't great, but the health benefits are good, and to be honest, I'd much rather be alone in a store that isn't crowded than deal with people during the day. My shift is from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. Additionally, I am now familiar with every inch of that location, including the back of my hand. The fluorescent lights hum in different ways in different areas, and the freezer units make a particular clicking noise when they cycle on, and based on their squeaking patterns, I can tell which shopping carts have wobbly wheels. That Tuesday night began like any other, with an early chill in Pennsylvania. I recall tightening my cardigan as I made my way from my beat-up Honda Civic to the employee entrance. The parking lot was the store had that familiar after-hours atmosphere, with all the chaos of the day shift cleaned up and reset for tomorrow. The aisles were perfectly straight, the shelves were restocked, and the only sounds were the soft whir of refrigeration. The store was almost empty, save for a few other overnight workers and their cars scattered under the yellowish street lights. During our brief team meeting, my supervisor Derek gave me the typical summary of the normal cleaning process, which starts with the customer restrooms and moves to the break rooms before tackling the personnel facilities. There were also periodic beeps from the self-checkout machines conducting their nightly diagnostics. I worked methodically through my checklist for the first few hours before finishing the main floor without any problems, listening to a true crime podcast through one earbud while keeping the other open in case someone needed me. The customer restrooms were surprisingly clean that evening, just the break room's routine maintenance, which included refilling toilet paper, inspecting soap dispensers, and thoroughly cleaning everything, took longer than expected since, by 2:30 a.m., someone had reportedly exploded a burrito in the microwave and had not bothered to clean it up. I was ahead of schedule and felt quite good about the night. The store was serene, which only happens during the quiet hours when everything outside seems to stop and even the typical noises seem to be subdued. Cocoon of peace and quiet that I had learned to value over my months of working. About 2:45 a.m. I moved my cleaning cart in the direction of the staff restroom next to the back offices. This specific restroom was hidden in a hallway that staff members used to get to the management offices, break room, and time clock. During the day, It saw a lot of traffic, but at night, it was one of the store's calmer areas. As I got closer, I noticed that the light was already on, which surprised me because we're pretty stringent about turning off lights. I assumed that one of my coworkers had used it earlier and had just forgotten to flip the switch, so I knocked gently to break the tradition of leaving lights in empty rooms to conserve electricity. The heavy door was slightly jarred, and I could see the brilliant fluorescent brightness streaming out into the dim hallway. Once during my first week, I walked in on a sea worker by accident and shouted out a gentle hello. When no one answered, I used my shoulder to force the door open while pushing the cleaning cart through the small opening. That's when I noticed a young girl, perhaps 6 years old, sitting cross-legged on the chilly tile floor in the middle of the bathroom. She had shoulder-length blonde hair that appeared to have been neglected for days, a pink t-shirt featuring an unidentified cartoon character, and blue jeans that were to the thing that most impressed me was how completely still she sat, like a statue, with her hands resting on her knees and her back straight as a board, staring straight at the camera. Her tiny sneakers were untied, leaving the laces trailing on the floor around her. The fluorescent light above created sharp shadows across her pale face, making her appear almost ghostly against the white tiles. She was staring straight at me with these big, unblinking blue eyes that were way too serious for a child her age. For a brief minute, I thought maybe my pulse began to race when I realized what was happening. What was a youngster doing here at nearly 3 in the morning? That the long hours and late nights had finally caught up with me. My mind was racing with questions as I stood there clutching the handle of my cleaning cart so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Where were her parents? How had she even gotten into the store, let alone into the employee-only area? The young girl didn't blink or move to acknowledge my obvious shock. Instead, she just continued to stare at me with the silence in that tiny bathroom was oppressive. I could hear my own breathing, the distant hum of the store's ventilation system, and the faint buzz of the fluorescent bulb overhead, but she made no noise, no movement, and her eyes were abnormally still, as if she was waiting for something. I finally managed to say, "What are you doing here? Where are your mommy and daddy?" But it was hardly more than a whisper, and there was no sign that she was even breathing. It was more like gazing at a picture of a child than a real, living person. "Darling." I took a small step into the bathroom, leaving my cart in the doorway, and tried again with a slightly louder voice. "Honey, are you?" She didn't respond, didn't even tilt her head or change her expression, just kept that intense, unwavering stare that was beginning to make my skin crawl. It felt weird in my mouth, like I was talking to myself in an empty room. "All right, are you lost?" The acoustics in that tiny room made my voice sound odd and hollow, reflecting off the tile walls in a way that seemed to highlight the child's complete silence. I lowered myself a little to try to reach her eye level in the hopes of coming across as less intimidating. She sat there like a porcelain doll, perfectly still except for those piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. Then, without warning or a change in expression, she got up. "My name is Nina, and I work here. Can you tell me your name?" She moved with such grace and fluidity that it seemed as though she was floating rather than pulling herself up from the ground with her hands. She also didn't make any of the little noises or adjustments that people usually make when they change positions. 1 minute she was sitting, the next she was standing. She took a step toward me while still maintaining that intense gaze, and, as her untied shoelaces made gentle, whisking noises against the tile, I automatically backed up, bumping into the sound of a cleaning cart and a disinfectant bottle clattering to the floor reverberated throughout the bathroom like a gunshot. But the child didn't even bat an eye. Instead, she continued to approach me with deliberate, measured steps, her face entirely blank save for those unnaturally bright eyes that never left. I could have reached out and touched her shoulder because she was so close, but something in my gut told me not to as she went by. She didn't even acknowledge my presence when she got to the doorway where I was standing. Instead, she just walked past me like I was just another piece of furniture in her path. Noticed a strange smell that wasn't the usual child smell, like bubble bath, playground dirt, or even the slightly sour milk smell that kids occasionally have. Instead, it was a musty, stale smell that resembled old books left in a damp basement or clothes that had been the faint but distinct smell, which had been kept in an attic for years. Made my stomach turn in a way I couldn't explain. The young girl entered the hallway and turned left, going toward the storage areas and back offices. Her movements were still uncannily fluid, as if she were gliding rather than walking, and those loose shoelaces kept their soft. I watched her tiny figure vanish down the dim hallway while whisking against the linoleum floor for what seemed like an eternity. My rational mind begged me to follow her to make sure she was safe, to find out how she had entered the store, and to return her to her parents. But my body refused to obey every instinct I had. The logical part of my brain kept telling me that this was just a lost child, probably wandering around while her parent worked somewhere in the store, or perhaps a family member of one of the overnight stalkers. But the way she'd moved to let her go and act like I hadn't seen her at all, I stared at that terrible stench, and after what must have been 2 or 3 minutes, I pushed myself to go into the hallway and look in the direction she had gone. The corridor was around 50 feet long before I virtually sprinted toward the end of the hallway, my cleaning supplies rattling behind me as I hauled the cart along, heading toward other departments illuminated by those same buzzing fluorescent strips that bathed everything in harsh white light, but she was nowhere to be seen. Intersection, I looked straight ahead toward the employee parking exit, left toward the electronic stock room, and right toward the grocery receiving area. All 3 directions were deserted, just long expanses of industrial flooring illuminated by humming lights. How could she have vanished so fast, even if she was running? My voice reverberated off the concrete walls and returned to me hollow and odd, and the only answer I received was, "Hello, little girl." The child couldn't have escaped my sight in the time it took me to gather my courage and follow. I stood there spinning slowly in circles, looking in every doorway and shadow, listening to the distant sound of a pallet jack being operated somewhere in the store. But there was no sign of her at all. It seemed as though she had just evaporated into thin air, leaving behind only that lingering musty smell that seemed to cling to the inside of my nostrils. Panic started to set in as I realized I needed to report this immediately. A child loose in the store, especially at this hour, was a serious safety issue. Regardless of how she'd gotten there, I abandoned my cleaning cart and hurried toward the front of the store where I knew Derek would be working on inventory reports in the manager's office. My footsteps echoed loudly in the empty aisles as I half walked, half jogged past towering shelves of merchandise. The store felt different now, less peaceful and more ominous, like the shadows between the aisles might be hiding something I didn't want to see. When I reached the customer service area, I could see the light on in the office and Derek's familiar silhouette hunched over paperwork. I knocked on the door frame and let myself in, probably looking as frantic as I felt. "Derek, we have a problem," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's a child in the store, a little girl, maybe 6 years old. I found her in the employee restroom and now I can't find her anywhere." He looked up from his papers with that face supervisors get when they're not sure if they're dealing with a real emergency or just another bizarre overnight shift narrative. Derek immediately took it seriously, which I appreciated. He called for Marcus and Jennifer, the other 2 evening workers, over the radio and instructed them to meet us at the customer service desk. Within 5 minutes, we had formed what felt like a search party in the oddly quiet store. I described the small girl in detail. The blonde hair, pink shirt, big jeans, unfastened sneakers, and stated exactly where I'd seen her and which direction she'd gone. Derek turned up the security camera feeds on the display behind the customer service desk, and we spent the next 20 minutes studying tape from every viewpoint in the back hallway area. We watched the timestamp tick from 2:40 I continuing to look for any indication of a tiny human moving through the hallways. The camera captured me coming up to the my cart, vanished inside the employee restroom for a few minutes before coming out and looking about the hallways hurriedly. But no child was using the restroom or dropping out. Strolling along any of the hallways, the cameras captured every other detail flawlessly, including a moth flitting about one, even a paper towel that had blown across the floor earlier in the evening while Derek was making his way to the break room from a cleaning cart. But there were no young girls. Marcus and Jennifer looked at each other in a way that I didn't like, as if they were worried that I was going crazy. Derek kept as we viewed the video for the 3rd time. His face remained neutral, but I could see the doubt beginning to seep into his eyes. I claimed that perhaps she entered earlier and the cameras somehow missed it. But even as I stated that, I was aware of how as absurd as it sounded. These were top-notch security cameras meant to capture employee and shoplifting theft. We chose to do a physical search, even though it would be quite unlikely to find a toddler strolling around the store. Derek took the electronics and automotive departments. Marcus went to the grocery store, and they split up to cover more ground. Jennifer covered home items and clothes in the drugstore, and I returned to the staff areas where I had seen her. Spend 45 minutes going around each aisle, searching behind the displays. The store felt huge during that time, even going so far as to whisper her name in storage rooms in case she was hiding somewhere. That hunt, which was filled with shadowy nooks and tall shelves that might readily hide a little child. But we discovered nothing, no sign of her, and no proof that she had ever been there when they regrouped at the customer service counter. The environment was tight and uncomfortable. I followed Derek's request to reread the story, making an effort to remember every element exactly as it had occurred, but even as I was speaking, I could hear how childish it sounded. Looking at nothing while sitting still on a bathroom floor. Then leaving, and Marcus hypothesized that perhaps I had been disappearing into thin air while security cameras captured everything save her presence. Jennifer agreed. I'm more exhausted than I realized that the fluorescent lights and long hours could play tricks on your eyes. In agreement, stating that she had once mistakenly believed she had spotted a customer in the store during the night, before realizing Derek was more tactful in the way shadows were cast on a mannequin, declaring that he would notify corporate and ask the day shift if anyone was missing a child. But his tone, I appreciated that he wasn't dismissing me outright, but it seemed like he was just going through the motions. He didn't really believe what I was telling them. In fact, I doubt that I would have if someone had told me the same tale. Thought it or not, the remainder of my shift was a haze of awkward silence and sidelong glances from I resumed my cleaning routine, coworkers, but I wasn't feeling too motivated every day. Every time I came to an empty room or a dark nook, I found myself half hesitating, anticipating the employee to notice the young child sitting there with her strangely motionless stance and intense gaze. Even though the heating system was operating normally when I first entered the bathroom, it felt different and somehow colder now. When I was done cleaning it, I saw something I had overlooked earlier. A tiny moist footprint on the tile floor that was roughly the size of a kid's shoe. She had already mostly dried out where she had been sitting, but the harsh fluorescent light still made her slightly visible. Pondered for a while whether it had been there when I first entered or if my imagination was deceiving me once more by the time my 6 a.m. shift was over. I was shaken and fatigued. I was doubting everything I had seen, and although Derek had promised to investigate the event further, I could tell he had already. As I made my way to my car, I dismissed it as an instance of exhaustion from working an overnight shift. I kept glancing back at the store in the fading early light, half expecting to see a tiny person observing me from one of the windows, yet all that was visible was the building's recognizable bulk, keeping its secrets hidden till the start of the following night shift against the pale morning sky.